Hey, everybody. I'm Leonard Jacobs, Interim Executive Director of the Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning. I'd like to welcome you to Building Equity Through Art, Pulling from the Past to Shape Our Future. This is the culminating event of the first year of JCAL's Building Equity for Immigrant, Indigenous, and Native American Artists program. It's a pilot project funded through New York Community Trust. And we would first like to thank the Trust for its very generous support of this program. It is a 2-year program, so it will continue. In addition, I'd like to thank the Core Council. This is a group of 9 artists and arts administrators who have conceived, developed, and produced all 9 events that you're going to see during this festival. And most remarkably, they have done it in the midst of COVID. They've done an amazing job. And on behalf of all of us, staff and board at JCAL, we really want to thank every member of the Core Council for their work and their perseverance. Last little bit of business. You may have noticed that JCAL is running a fundraiser. If you look just below, you can see a link. This fundraiser is to raise funds for our Black History Month programming coming up in February. Our interim artistic director, Courtney French, has programmed February with 7 events, I believe. If you click on the link, you can read more about them. We are more than halfway toward our goal. 100% of your donations go to the artists that are involved in these programs, not for admin. And we'd ask for your support. If you have any questions about anything, please always feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm at leonard@jcal.org. And now I'd like to pass it off to our interim artistic director, the visionary Mr. Courtney French.
I'm Courtney French, Interim Artistic Director for the Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning. Welcome. Welcome to our presentation. We would like to thank you and your family for joining us today. Enjoy the program.
Welcome, everyone. I would like to begin by first thanking the Building Equities Project of the Jamaica Center for the Arts and Learning for sponsoring the program tonight. I am Rafael Landron, educator, cultural worker, and board member of Prolibertad Freedom Campaign. I'm also part of the Core Council, who is organizing these artistic and cultural events throughout this week, and I'm proud to be a part of that Core Council as well. The purpose of tonight's program is to continue to explore the current conditions of Puerto Rico, both on the island and in the greater diaspora, to celebrate the resiliency of the Puerto Rican people through culture and poetry. I will be playing both the role of host and cultural presenter. Tonight, we hope to give you a good blend of poetry and politics of the Puerto Rican diaspora. Our first presenter tonight is Nancy Mercado. Nancy Mercado is the 2017 recipient of the American Book Awards for Lifetime Achievement. She was named one of 200 living individuals who best embody the work and spirit of Frederick Douglass by the Frederick Douglass Family Initiative and the Anti-Racist Research Policy Center at the American University. She is editor of the first Nuyorican women's anthology published in Voices e-magazine, Hunter College, CUNY. For more information, go to nancy-mercado.com.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor, as always. Thank you, Rafael. I'd like to start or just read one piece that has to do with what we're going through, which is this plague. It's titled Journey from the Plague. Hellish sirens bend with distance through a day's gray mist. The sounds of birds emerge, claiming my mind's eye. My childhood appears. My mother shields us from freezing unbridled winds, using a butter knife, stuffing toilet paper into our rattling cracked window frames. I follow her, mimic her at 7 or 8. I follow my mother from window frame to porous window frame. Then sirens dissolve my memory again. Returned to my cloistered quarantine. Do I hurl myself into a shuttered city, emptied, hollowed out, saved for ambulances transporting the dead, birds and pigeons, insects and mice, the trees and the flowers of spring? Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. The poem I'm going to read now is Filiberto Vive. And this poem is about a nationalist leader in Puerto Rico who was assassinated by the FBI a few years back. Filiberto Vive in every project where a Puerto Rican is doing battle with hunger and deprivation. Filiberto Vive in a Borícua child's fingertips as she reaches for her first book. Filiberto Vive in Vieques on a wave that has washed away the U.S. Navy. Filiberto Vive in the branches of my abuela's mango tree in her patio in Puerto Nuevo. Filiberto Vive in every cry that has ousted corrupt governors like Rosselló. Filiberto Vive in the cracked tenements of the South Bronx, Lower East Side, and Harlem. Filiberto Vive in the streets of every urban dwelling and little town where a bodeguero will recount his name with pride. Filiberto Vive in every caserillo, in every prison, in every alley where we are surviving amongst all odds to live and be free. Filiberto Vive on the notes of a trumpet and guitar, piercing silence in the swing of La Sonora Ponceña. Filiberto Vive in the towns across the U.S. like Hartford, Connecticut, where Wells Fargo will keep him immortalized. Filiberto Vive in the beating of every Puerto Rican's heart that is demanding self-determination and respect. Filiberto Vive in schoolyards and Senate halls, wherever there's a Puerto Rican yearning to be free. Filiberto Vive on the moon's ray that light up the phosphorescence in Fajardo, in every mountain of red earth, in every home with a machete, in the stars that shine our path when electricity has been cut, when our water has been shut, when our schools have been shuttered, when our hospitals have been closed. Filiberto Vive in every colony of the U.S. Filiberto Vive in Cuba, con el Che en el cielo watching us, demanding and challenging us to take up our mantle of justice. Filiberto Vive de las olas de Luquillo all the way to Orchard Beach. Filiberto Vive en nuestra alma, en cada rincón de nuestra corazón. Filiberto Vive wherever there is injustice, wherever we need to stand up from the first stone and bullet thrown in the face of any empire. Filiberto Vive allí. Our next poet is Angel Martinez. He is a professor, poet, singer, and musician. He has published poetry, articles, and book reviews in subjects of Puerto Rican studies. Angel?
Yes, thank you. For Arturo Alfonso Schomburg. Your poetry, your motion, your fight, your destiny. To know the slave's story through the hemisphere. Your fruit, all the faces gathered on the wall by 135th and Lenox. In your island, Borinquen, it was the year 1527, the first slave uprising. 1868, the last slave uprising. The drumbeat sounded the song to be heard through you. What did you do when you were told there was no Black history? In New York City, from Puerto Rico, what did you do when slaves told you the word? You made it treasure, in memory of Afro-Norteamericanos y Caribeños. The narrative would not die by you. The words of freedom would not disappear by your hand. The Black story would never be forgotten. So everyone, slave descended, can see herself, himself, strong. So every child can see herself, himself, proud. So every hand can see her labor, his labor, north to south in the hemisphere. What did you do when you were told there was no Black history? You, Afro-Boricua among Afro-Antillanos, roots fertile by your stand on the picket line with Cuban and Puerto Rican tabaqueros, cigar makers, fertile by your stand with freedom with El Club Las Dos Antillas of the Cuban Revolutionary Party. The devil turned pale by your Caribbean, each place same face, black seed rich indeed. You sold land's emancipation in memory for liberation. Hearing memoirs of blackness in Norteamericano wilderness, faces and hearts wise by compassion, steeled by love. What did you do, what did you say when you were told there was no black history? Your answer recorded the first cry of freedom, still dangerous as the cry today.
It's great, Angel. Our next guest is Ben Ramos. He is one of the coordinators of Prolibertad Freedom Campaign in New York City. He coordinates Prolibertad's social media, website, and public relations. He's a longtime community activist, political journalist, and food blogger.
Hola, hola, hola. Thank you so much, Rafael. First and foremost, on behalf of Prolibertad, I want to thank Rafael Landron and the Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning for inviting us to share our perspective on Puerto Rican news today. And not just news from Puerto Rico, but throughout the diaspora as well. I think the last time I was here, I was kind of like the bearer of doom and gloom. I was talking a lot about the COVID mismanagement in Puerto Rico and talking about the corruption, the gubernatorial and government corruption. I think today I'm going to focus on some affirming, positive, just wonderful, positive, good news. I think we need good news when we talk about Puerto Rico. So I want to start off with the gubernatorial election that took place recently on the island. On Tuesday, November 3rd, Puerto Ricans went to the polls on the island to vote in a new governor. They also participated in a plebiscite around whether Puerto Rico should be a state or not. I'm going to throw some math at you, some stats at you. 47% of people who are registered and eligible to vote did not vote in this election. Why? That we could have an entire series of conversations explaining why there's voter apathy in Puerto Rico. The corruption, the mismanagement, a lot of things have taken place on the island where a lot of people just did not want to participate. So 53% of the people that are eligible to vote voted. Of that 53%, 52 voted for El Partido Nuevo Progresista, the Puerto Rican New Progressive Party. It's the statehood forces. And that's why the governor now, the governor-elect, is Pedro Pierluisi. That is not good news for a lot of us, but let's move on to the good news. There's certain things about this election that really highlighted some positive psychological and political change on the island. First of all, the Puerto Rican Independence Party, which is used to only getting about 2% or 2.5% of the population, multiplied their numbers by 6. There was about 12 to 13% of the voters voted for the Puerto Rican Independence Party. This is historic. This has not been seen in an extremely long time. So it shows that there is some evolution, some growth, that the PIP is going out there and raising consciousness and registering people and motivating people to go to the polls. There's also a fourth party alternative that's called El Movimiento Victoria Ciudadana, the Citizens Victory Movement. It's a fourth alternative party. It's somewhat progressive. Made up of a lot of individuals that come from the different status parties and have run together under this label where they're not really dealing with the status issue of Puerto Rico, which in itself is a problem and something that needs to be looked at. But what's positive is that they won a couple of seats in Senate and in the legislature. So we're looking at the fact that the Puerto Rican population is becoming far more radical. It's looking at the PIP and it's looking at alternative parties besides the ELA party and the statehood party. So amongst all of the corruption and the issues that are popping up in every election, which is the mismanagement of that election and the votes that weren't counted and all that, we can kind of pull out some grains of positivity. We've got people thinking and voting in a very different new way. And maybe that's something that we as the left, we as organizers, we as activists can start tapping into. let's talk a little bit about COVID-19. We can't talk about Puerto Rico in the modern context and everything that's taking place in the world right now without dealing with the pandemic. And I'm going to throw a little bit more math at you. About 112,000 people have been diagnosed with COVID-19. According to the press, about 1,324 people have died since the pandemic started. A lot of Boricuas that are in the health field, a lot of our folks that are health workers and are just in the medical profession in general have been stating that those numbers that the press are giving to us are woefully inaccurate. That's always the case with Puerto Rico. Stats that come from the island are never what they really should be. Just recently this week, two interesting positive things have occurred. First of all, about 18,000 healthcare workers and frontline workers have received the Pfizer vaccination. Also, the Puerto Rican National Guard General, Jose Juan Reyes, stated that there is an action plan that starts as of this week until the summer of 2021 that states that between 70 to 75% of the population will be vaccinated using either the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine. So there is an action plan. A lot of folks were assuming that a plan of action, a vaccination plan would be something that would be coming down the road. The fact that it exists right now is something that is kind of positive. It's going to be something that a lot of us can rally towards and definitely hold the government accountable for. Let's make something clear. The current governor of Puerto Rico, Wanda Vázquez, much like Trump, completely underestimated this pandemic and has mismanaged the money that she has received so that it could go to communities for education and PPE. In fact, had it not been for Puerto Rican radicals and revolutionaries and independentistas protesting and demanding that the government use the money they receive for PPE, that probably would not have happened. And also, I need to give a shout out to the Puerto Rican activists, especially women, young people, and queer people in Puerto Rico that have been in the communities educating and providing resources and providing PPE. Once again, the Puerto Rican people take care of each other. When the government mismanages and does nothing and fails to provide resources, our people, again, young people, queer people, and women get out there and provide those services. Those numbers at 112,000 and that 1,324 would probably be a lot worse had it not been, again, got to keep giving the shout out to Puerto Rican women, young people, and queer folks that went out there and did what they did to make our people be safe. Let's talk about food insecurity and agricultural development on the island. And this is kind of linked to the pandemic. There is an organization that is called Vamos, and Vamos is starting a nationwide initiative on the island to start training people to do urban gardening and farming. Something that's really interesting is that in Puerto Rico, 85% of food is imported from all over the Caribbean, Latin America, the United States, even Europe. It's really bizarre to think that you are in a tropical Caribbean island eating plátano, yuca, malanga, mango, guineo. You're eating all of these things that could be grown on the island, but they're actually from the Dominican Republic, from Haiti, from Venezuela, from Mexico, from the US, from Spain. We have the ability to have an incredible agricultural industry, but because of colonization, we were hyper industrialized. So Vamos is starting this campaign, especially now because of the food insecurity that exists in Puerto Rico. Because of the pandemic, there has been so much rampant unemployment that there are a lot of families that are suffering from food insecurity. So they're going to go out there and train people to create urban gardens and to go out into the campos and use that land and raise those plátanos, create those, to plant that yuca and have it come from the island to create food security and food sustainability. And they're taking an approach which is really, really timely and necessary. They're focusing on gender equity. They're reaching out to a lot of the single mom, single female households that right now are really feeling the effects of unemployment and food insecurity. And they're reaching out to those moms and their children and are starting that training process. They really feel the next generation of farmers and urban gardeners are gonna, really be in the hands of our Puerto Rican sisters and their children. So they're starting that nationwide initiative in the next couple of weeks, and with the hope that eventually that 85% of food importation starts reducing and that Puerto Rico becomes self-sufficient, that there's sustainability, that there's an agricultural culture, that we return to it. We lost our agricultural culture because of colonization. I want to talk a little bit about the diaspora, 2 quick updates. This week, the Center for Popular Democracy sent a letter to the Biden-Harris administration laying out a plan for Puerto Rico. In the letter, 30 progressive Puerto Rican organizations signed it. Primarily, those organizations overwhelmingly are from the diaspora, but they were demanding a repeal of Promesa, a cancellation of the debt, the development of a true recovery program for the island, decolonization, and self-determination. And though some of us are criticizing that the term decolonization and independence are 2 different things, we can see that it is something that is positive. It may not be exactly the politics that all of us may agree with, but it's a step forward. There's these organizations that are coming together, bringing Puerto Rico to Biden before he even takes office in January. So this is an ongoing, developing news item, and we hope to give you guys, keep you guys updated. If you ever need to find out what's happening, go to prolibertad.org, or you can go to our Facebook page and our Facebook group, and we're tracking this. And we're critical and we're supportive. We're somewhere in the middle. So, folks, I also want to end off with this really powerful piece of information. About last week, there was a commemoration of the 50th anniversary of El Comité MIMP. El Comité MIMP was an organization that existed for 10 years, from 1970 to about 1980. It was a radical socialist Puerto Rican organization that existed in the Puerto Rican diaspora, primarily in New York, the Eastern Seaboard, with some folks in the West Coast as well. They put together a wonderful 50th anniversary where it was hosted by the People's Forum, and it ran from 12:30 to 4 o'clock. And it was a comprehensive history of that organization. Whenever we think about the Puerto Rican socialist movement, independentista movement in the diaspora in the 1970s, we're very focused on the Young Lords and then the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, but we don't think about El Comité MIMP and the amazing work that they did throughout the diaspora. And they have this wonderful program on the YouTube channel of the People's Forum. They're also going to be following up with other multimedia initiatives to educate about this group. And I wanted folks to know about that because we have to start expanding our perspective on our radical history. Not only do we need to know what's happening on the island and what occurred on the island throughout the decades, we need to know what happened in our diaspora. The Puerto Rican diaspora right now is actually larger than the population on the island. And our radical revolutionary history in the diaspora is one that is really not acknowledged by a lot of us. So I want everyone to go to the People's Forum, the YouTube channel of the People's Forum, and look up El Comité MIMP from 12:30 to 4 o'clock. And between 2 and 4, there was an actual panel with a lot of New York City-based activists that are involved to this day that came from El Comité MIMP. People like Frank Vergara, people like Lillian Jimenez, Esperanza Martel, Carmen Martel, Lourdes Garcia. You'll see different clips and interviews and the panel discussion that they all participated in. So I want folks to go out there and experience, learn, acknowledge, affirm, and absorb their radical history. So that has been my news, my good news for the ending of December, the ending of this year. Que viva Puerto Rico libre.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
That was excellent. Now we have, part of the segment is we have all the compañeros here. I was hoping that, Nancy, you are coming from the eulogy or commemoration of Miguel Algarín. Can you speak to his legacy?
Oh well, Miguel, it's still ongoing for anyone who wants to see it after our program. Of course, you can log on to Facebook and see it on any one of the organizations that's sponsoring it: the New York Poets Cafe, the Bronx Music and Cultural Heritage Center, City Lore, Bowery Poetry Club, Clemente Soto Vélez, Cultural Center. They're all streaming it. So all you have to do is get on their page. It's all public. You don't need a Facebook account, and you could just watch it. We're about they're right over there. I see them, and they're about maybe an hour behind. So you have plenty of time after we finish to take a look at some of that. It's really wonderful. Miguel Algarín was a great scholar. For those who don't know, he is the founder, one of the founders of the New York Poets Cafe. And he's also the person who chronicled the New York literary movement by publishing the first anthology of New York poetry. He was a Shakespearean scholar. He was a professor at Rutgers for 30 years. And he was a wonderful human being. He was great. He broke a lot of ground for Puerto Ricans here in the United States with his cafe, and now, which is the best part, is that Puerto Ricans, before, we were, because of the way capitalism works, divide and conquer, and you have to be very competitive all the time. So this has been ingrained, unfortunately, in our people. And so we found that the Puerto Ricans on the island and the Puerto Ricans here were like sort of in the beginning against each other, unfortunately. But now we're coming together, we're working together, and it's a wonderful thing that's happening. And I see it grow more and more every day, and Miguel was part of that connection that was made. Between our people on the island and our people here on the mainland. So that's brief as I can get. Yes.
That was great. Thank you, Nancy. Angel, I noticed that your poem was about Arturo Schomburg. Can you speak a little bit about his legacy and who he is, for those who might not know who he is?
It's a great question. Again, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. Arturo Schomburg is the reason why the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture is named for in New York City, part of the New York Public Library System. It's a non-circulating library, but has an amazing collection that started all because of the private collection of one Arturo Alfonso Schomburg from Santurce. Moved to New York City at the age of 18. This was 1892. And through the Cuban revolutionary Flor Baerga, he was introduced to Jose Marti. And Marti was very much impressed with this young man. And that's how he became active in what became the Cuban Revolutionary Party later in the year, as founding as secretary of one of the clubs, Dos Antillas, that I talked about in the poem. Later on, while he was getting a job as a lawyer's assistant, he started collecting a lot of bibliographical material on Black history of United States, Caribbean, and Africa. And this became what became eventually the Schomburg Library, as we know. And the reason why I think we have to consider Schomburg, I was actually asked by Ted Wilson to write this poem many years ago. This was in 2002, I wrote it. And I really want to get across that here was a Puerto Rican that without him, we wouldn't have such a chronicle of Black history that we have. And when I mean Black history, again, we talk about North America, we talk about all the Americas, as well as Africa. So it's a very broad, it's a very broad scope of material which he has. Hopefully, when it opens again, if you've never had a chance to check out the Schomburg Center, definitely, I encourage you to do so. And I have to say, this is a Puerto Rican that made this possible. We have to recognize where the diaspora has made enormous contributions, because a lot of people don't even realize Schomburg was from Puerto Rico. And I think we definitely need to acknowledge that. And even though he's not been with us since his passing in 1938, his impact, his influence really comes as a teacher of the Black diasporic experience, which is very much intertwined with the Puerto Rican and Cuban experiences, as we've seen over the decades, how we've fought together in common struggles. And to think that he was part of that Cuban and Puerto Rican independence movement, it just goes to show that from those radical roots, he was able to create something that's lasted through time, and this is going to last through time.
Thank you, Angel. You know that Ben, that kind of reminded me of what you were talking about, the difference between independence and decolonization. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit, because I was thinking about our status, that it once Puerto Rico does become independent, what does that mean if we're under the capitalist system? And maybe you could speak to the difference between decolonization and independence.
There are a lot of us that do work around the United Nations, around decolonization and independence. And every year we go up to the UN Decolonization Committee hearing, and we make these presentations about whether Puerto Rico should be free or a state, or should it remain, the colony that it is. Decolonization does not necessarily mean liberation. I think a lot of us use that term and we think it means, the ending of the colony. But the ending of the colony doesn't necessarily mean independence. The ending of the colony can mean statehood. I have been at the United Nations where I have heard statehooders speak and make presentations and say, Puerto Rico is a colony. We need to decolonize the island and become the 51st state. So this assumption that decolonization equals liberation and self-determination is kind of a misnomer. We have to get that perspective out of our mind. When we say self-determination, we have to say independence, liberation, freedom. We have to be very specific, because there are a lot of colonies throughout the world, throughout Africa, throughout Asia, throughout Latin America, that have been decolonized. And what they've become is countries that are still linked to the colonizer, that are still linked to Western Europe, and linked to all of the countries that colonized them in the first place. We don't want to become a neo-colony. We want to become our own independent country that is self-reliant, self-sufficient, and has the ability to make its own policies. Sometimes, these countries decolonize, they become neo-colonies, and they can't make political or economic decisions without looking back to that colonizing country and asking for permission. That's not the relationship we want. We want independence and self-determination. And in order for us to do that, we got to get out there and organize and educate, build that vanguard movement throughout the diaspora, and support whatever happens on the island. Once again, the fact that the PIP got 12% as opposed to the 2% is a major thing to celebrate. Hay esperanza. Tú sabes, there's hope. There's a shifting to the left that we need to tap into. And I think all four of us have something in common. We're all writers, whether we're poets or essayists or journalists, we're all writers. We know the power of language, the power of words, the power of semantics. And for a long time now, Prolibertad has been telling people, stop acting like the word decolonize equals freedom. It does not. And I know that it's like the movement buzzword and everyone loves that term and everyone's decolonizing your health and decolonizing food and decolonizing this or that. But we have to be real specific. We have to be very resolute and clear with that language. We want independence. We want self-determination.
Got it. Angel or Nancy, Schomburg, as you said, Angel was both, interested in African history, but he's also interested in decolonizing or decolonization or also independence. Can you make link between how we identify ourselves as Afro-Indigenous and the question of independence or freedom in Puerto Rico? Either.
Well, definitely. If you look, sure, definitely. When you look at the history of Borinquen, you have to look that our fight for freedom started when Columbus invaded us and murdered us and kidnapped 300 Tainos back to Spain, never to come back again. Many died along the way. And we have to remember this is a 525 plus year history of struggle. I mean, there are moments in time that we've been able to document actual sharpening those contradictions, the heighten of the struggles, such as the Cacique Aguebana's uprising in 1511, or the slave uprisings that happened soon after. So they commit genocide against the Tainos, and then you bring in the African slaves, which is par for the course throughout the Western Hemisphere. But they could never kill that sense that we want to be free, and that's what I'm glad Ben brought up the distinction, because I mean, decolonizing is one aspect, but without the idea of getting rid of capitalism, getting rid of colonialism, getting rid of imperialism, Puerto Rico can't be free. We need to really fight that, and that's the only way Puerto Rico can be free, when it just gets all those shackles off of it. And what Arturo Schomburg was important to us is helping us realize that you have to know your own history of struggle. It's not just something of noble savagery or something that looks nice in a 45-year-old social studies textbook. I'm just being general. I'm not giving the actual age of the textbook, but you get the idea just how backward these ideas are. So we have to fight against the backwardness that we can't be free, because as again, we have the resources and we have the people, and we definitely have the ability to decide our own fate, and that's what self-determination is about. See, decolonize is nice, but what we have yet to hear is that S word, self-determination. That carries a long way and has currency, that it's a right of every nationally oppressed people, and it's a duty of the oppressed people everywhere, whether at home or in the diaspora, to fight for. And let's not forget, Cuban Revolutionary Party, which was fighting for the independence of Cuba and Puerto Rico, was founded in New York. Not Puerto Rico, not Cuba. It wasn't safe to organize there. So the diaspora has a very big role to play in this, to ensure our freedom and our liberation.
Angel, I wanted to bring Nancy in. Part of Miguel Algarin's legacy in the New Eurekan Poets Cafe is that that place was not only a place for Puerto Ricans, that it was a place for other oppressed nationalities to express themselves. Maybe you can speak to that. I'm thinking of Amiri Baraka, of all the different oppressed nationalities that came to express themselves in the literary movement within the New Eurekan Poets movement,
Yes, that's correct. There is still a huge African American influence, and also working with us in partnership, and not only African Americans, Asian writers, Caucasian writers. Allen Ginsberg in the early days frequented the the cafe, and Allen Ginsberg was also a revolutionary, basically, and William Burroughs, you name the people. Alvin Ailey used to go there. I mean, you name them. And Miguel opened it up for all different cultures to come in and join with us. And we learn from each other and help each other, and that's part of it too. So, I think that in terms of achieving or moving ahead to achieve our independence as a people, and the independence as a nation, which we are, is that we have to not only just work with each other, but we have to work with other cultures that will help us and will support us in our struggle for independence and to gain our freedom. We have to work with other cultures who have attained their freedom too. That's very important, because we learn from them how to go about it, because the United places like the United States are so big and so monstrous that we have to learn how to survive, notwithstanding those kind of entities, like Cuba has for so long, and other places have. So I believe that that's very important to, connect with other cultures for that and many other reasons,
Thank you, Nancy. Ben, I know that Prolibertad has worked with other oppressed groups and nationalities. I'm thinking of the Jericho movement, the work of other political prisoners. Can you speak to the links that are being made with other oppressed nationalities, please?
Like Nancy said, we live in the United States, and there's a lot of oppressed people in the United States. And almost all of these oppressed nationalities and groups have political prisoners. We have Black revolutionaries, white revolutionaries, Asian revolutionaries, Latinx revolutionaries that have been incarcerated because of their actions, and mostly actions and frame-ups and lies that have kept them in prison. And Prolibertad, when we were founded 26 years ago, we said we can't free the Puerto Rican political prisoners without our allies supporting us. So we are very proud to say, Prolibertad has always said free the Puerto Rican political prisoners, but we also believe in freeing Leonard Peltier, freeing Mumia, freeing all of the Black Liberation Army political prisoners, the Move 9. We realize that our strength and our power is determinant when we link with our allies. And that's been something that some folks have denounced Prolibertad for, and others have uplifted us. And I say that because our community has a lot of mixed issues about us working with different folks. The reality is we are in a country that is made up of diasporic people. They're African diasporic people here, indigenous, white folks from all over Europe, and from movements that have political prisoners in Europe. So we have had to come together and build that solidarity. I'm proud to say Boricuas have been marching for Mumia, for Leonard Peltier, for various political prisoners for decades. And I'm happy to say that we in Prolibertad have pushed that. We are only going, look at Oscar. We freed Oscar Lopez Rivera after 35, 36 years of work. It wasn't just Puerto Rico and Boricuas in the diaspora. I marched with African Americans, with white folks, with Asians. I marched with every nationality, and they marched with us, and they helped us free Oscar. They helped us free our political prisoners. So building those ties is necessary. And I just want to throw in one thing. I didn't know Miguel Algarin personally, but I met him when I was younger. And I remember talking with him about writing and becoming a writer. And I said, I want to be a journalist. And I can remember Miguel at the New Yorican Poets Cafe said, write about freedom, write about liberation. Write about your people and how incredible your people are. And I can remember that because the New Yorican Poets Cafe was also a center for radical politics. We can't forget that. Black Panthers, Young Lords, people from various revolutionary political organizations would be at that poets cafe, reciting poetry, listening to each other, having conversations, and building revolution while having, their drinks and having fun and listening to good music. So everything Nancy said, we are in a unique place, and it is our duty to build that solidarity amongst ourselves and with each other for all of our liberation, for Black liberation, for Indigenous liberation, for all of our liberation.
Amen to that. Angel?
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. Yes.
Angel, you spoke, you told me about Boricua futurism, as thinking about, we're all using our imagination as to wondering what Puerto Rico can be. Maybe you can speak a little bit about how you see, what is this thing, Boricua futurism? How do you see our island, being free, sustainable, and how are you imagining this?
Well, I think Ben actually gave us a hint earlier about growing our own food. That's a big part of our future. It needs to be a big part of our future. And essentially what I'm thinking about here, looking at the future, is that when we talk about what has come before us, all the struggles that have come before us, and what has been good for us, and getting rid of what has been negative for us, that should lead us to a conversation, not just what's happening now, but imagine what Puerto Rico can be. And we have to really start thinking about that. The empire is in a decline, and since the empire is in that state, and it's very dangerous, and it's the final stages, like any monster that's wounded, It's very dangerous to deal with. But in the midst of that, we have to start planning ahead. Just like when you look at I was reading an article not too long ago about they were giving an image of the fall of the Roman Empire, and one image they said that there was an image of I think it was written down that somebody was gardening outside the ruins of a Roman Colosseum. And we have to think about that. What's going to come out of the ruins of the oppressor's state? And in the process, we have to imagine Puerto Rico capable, and it's going to take a lot of reparations for this. There's a lot of dues to be paid by those who oppressed our people. But the possibilities are beyond our ability to imagine. Imagine things. I'm thinking about things like, I'm just giving you a random example, but imagine that Puerto Rico launches its own satellite. Imagine Puerto Rico having its own flags on its ship. I mean, imagine that itself. I mean, what happened after Hurricane Maria? I mean, people were mad that ships had to go through Florida and then come to Puerto Rico, raising the price of the food that we could easily make ourselves. Instead of importing, have to go through a separate shipping company. So imagine, again, Puerto Rico with its own flag, has its own representation, having embassies around the world, being able to sign its own treaties with indigenous peoples in the United States, forming an economic union with the rest of the Caribbean islands, having full relations with Cuba without the United States interference. These are some of the things we have to imagine that Puerto Rico can be. But I think while we're fighting our struggles now, in addition to fighting for them, and we have to fight for them, we have to free our prisoners, we have to make sure Puerto Rico's free, but start thinking about, okay, when Puerto Rico's free, what's that going to look like? And the time is now to really start imagining that. Maybe we won't see it immediately, but we could start planning ahead. I mean, after all, Cuba's educational system came from Jose Marti's educational theories. So that was a lapse of decades, but it doesn't mean we can't start the process.
I don't know if we wanted to address this issue, but like, let's say the resurgence of the indigenous movement. In my mind, the indigenous movement is inherently an anti-capitalist movement because they are reclaiming the land. We are reclaiming our identity, and we are also it has to against these corporations who are kind of controlling Puerto Rico. What do you guys think in terms of the the rise of the indigenous identity being linked to an anti-capitalist movement? Anybody?
The indigenous, yeah. I mean, a lot of different cultures have had a terrible time. I mean, and that's putting it very lightly here. And that I find the indigenous population has been probably if not the worst, one of the very worst that have suffered under this, system, and they've been fighting since day one to try to get out from under this barrage of terrible of being killed, of their culture being suppressed, and trying to their culture. They're trying to wipe out their culture. So the indigenous, we have a lot to learn from them, and we should join with them, and we have, but we should keep joining with them. To support each other's struggles. I mean, it's like the Palestinians; they've been decimated, and they've been fighting since forever, and unfortunately, the United States supports Israel to such an extent that it's just killing off the Palestinians, and that's the truth, whether anybody likes it or not. And it's not about being anti-Jewish or anything like that. It's not about that at all. Okay, so please spare me. Okay, it's about the truth. Period. Okay, if people don't like it, then too bad. But that's what the truth is. Okay, so we need to bond with all of these other groups as much as possible. Have them help us, and us learn from them, and vice versa. I mean, like this thing about food, the food situation in Puerto Rico. That shouldn't even be happening. I mean, there should be food all over the place in Puerto Rico. They taught us how to buy, how to import all of our food when we could grow mostly, if not all of it, in on the island. We don't need to be importing. So 98% or however high the percentage is of our food in Puerto Rico, tropical island. That's crazy, And then they say there's not enough land. That's another farce, that there's not enough land to plant. We don't have enough land. Not true. There are ways of doing that. There are ways. Even if the island is small, there's still ways of planting so that we can satisfy the population, So
Ben, before we start wrapping up, I wanted to ask you, what is the update with the Ana Belén, the political prisoner?
So, brothers and
To be
sisters,
released this year, right?
yes. Ana Belén Montes is a Puerto Rican prisoner of conscience that has been in jail for 19 years because she chose to follow her conscience and not the law. She chose to protect Cuba's right to independence, self-determination, and autonomy. And the U.S. government arrested her and they buried her in a military prison, military hospital. And her case is one that's very complicated, but what I can say is that about a year from now, around this period of time, next year, probably a little early 2022, Ana Belén will be free. She will be getting out. She will be able to go and live with her family and friends in Puerto Rico. She will be a 60-something-year-old cancer patient. So Prolibertad has been designing some ways of helping her with her own sustainability. You can go to the Prolibertad website, prolibertad.org, and read a little bit more about her case and what we're doing. But we're going to be in a really amazing spot around this time next year. There will be no Boricuas that are radical revolutionary or prisoners of conscience or anything in jail. That's something that we have seen since like the early 70s, late 60s. So her case is one that's very complicated. I want everyone to go to prolibertad.org and you can read up on her case and the work that we're doing to support her.
All right, great. With that, I think we're going to start wrapping up. We're going to have some poetry, and then we're going to close. So, Nancy, if you could lead us off.
Okay. Thank you. I am going to read again because the environmental situation is so terrible, and we have to, hopefully Biden coming in and naming these people to the cabinet that he's named will take this on and really do the best they can, because it's really a bad situation. So this is called Karma Arriving Home to Roost, and it has to do with the environment, the environmental degradation that we're responsible for, actually. Earth put a roaring halt to our empty, rabid existence, ceasing marathon plastic productions, disintegrating worldwide stock markets, shuttering ubiquitous greed. Earth put a roaring halt to our multi-million-dollar games, sunk crude oil markets to asunder, stopped our titillating trophy hunts, our eating bloody meat in hordes, our cruel trampling of the land, put an end to our soiling of the skies, our tarnishing the homes where water beasts are born. In one thunderous clap, the planet hurled an instant standstill to our haywire, to our decapitation of mountaintops, our butchering of tree communities, to our murdering sprees of elephant and whale, tiger infants and elders, mothers and girls. Throughout passing days of sirens, our existence is halted. A new plague set into motion. Our mass die-off launched. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Nancy. The poem I'm going to read is about the plight of political prisoners. It's titled, I Chose. My hands hold tightly onto iron cages. You see, I chose to end colonialism, and so it is through all types of revisions, conclusions, and judgments I chose. No one can take that away from me. What a life I have led, loved through plexiglass wire handles, learned to appreciate family visitation, love chats, learned to love intensely through lights out and drop-ins, but do not pity me because I chose, and no one can take that away. Through bouts of doubt attacks, I've held firm. I don't need your pity, I need you to live greatly. Stand, my friends, we can change the world. Our lives do make differences, our choices do create realities. Stand and choose bravely. Take on the biggest challenges, the ones you feel in the darkest hours, those quiet moments of reflection when we can sense our power. Create a better place to live. On dreams of Yunque waterfalls, I pledge myself to the earth. I commit myself to the Yautía and Yucca. Only they know the truth. Why stand by and see them dug up by greedy machines thought up in corporate boardrooms where profit rules? I stand for the Malanga and for the Flamboyant. I stand for the Morir Vivir plans that close at the touch. You may judge me, but I won when I chose. And when it comes down to it, I love you too. When I go, wrap me in palm leaves and put me in where I come from, because I'm coming back as a plantain who will be picked from a tree by my children's children, who will tell stories of ancestors long gone who chose freedom. Angel?
Puerto Rican garden dream. Can you grow gandules in a barrio garden far from home? I've seen it in Philadelphia. Did you see a hen and her chicks on the sidewalk? I grew up seeing that in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. We can grow los barrios. Amid the brick-faced crevices, we must never neglect Pachamama, Madre Tierra. It's our land to plant flags as well as flowers, a promise made for Bomba y Plena and Los Jardines. As son rises from an old radio and a rooster crows in these spaces liberated where we speak our names.
I'd like to thank all the panelists for tonight's program. Nancy Mercado, Angel Martinez, and Ben Ramos from Prolibertad. I'd also like to thank again the Building Equities Project. This has been our pleasure and honor to work with this through JCal. I would like everybody to have a good night. Free Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Respectful greetings. My name is Roberto Mucaro Borrero, and I'm the facilitator of JCal's Building Equity Project. I trust you enjoyed the previous program, and I invite you to check out all the other exciting programs featured in our Building Equity Through Art, Pulling from the Past to Shape Our Future multicultural event made possible by the New York Community Trust. All the Building Equity programs presented during this festival are dedicated to the memory of our dear departed colleague, Kevin Tarrant. You can learn more about Kevin and the Building Equity Project and programs by visiting the JCal website. While you're there, please consider supporting JCal's Black History Month programs with a donation. Thank you and happy holidays.